Sadie Cunningham realized her husband was cheating because the woman at the dinner table was wearing her necklace. Not a similar necklace. Not inspired by it. Her necklace. The diamond Lloyd had clasped around Sadie's neck on their 10th anniversary, while promising, "There will never be another woman." Now Celeste Harper sat beside him at a candlelit charity gala, laughing softly, while Lloyd rested his hand on her thigh beneath the table, like Sadie no longer existed. And the worst part. Everyone already knew. The investors, the wives, even Lloyd's mother. Sadie felt humiliation crawl up her spine like ice water. But instead of crying, she smiled. A slow, terrifying smile that made Lloyd's face suddenly lose color. Because in that exact moment, something inside Sadie quietly died. And something far more dangerous took its place. If you've ever stayed silent while your heart was breaking, comment below and tell me what finally made you stop protecting the people who hurt you. And if you love emotional stories about betrayal, revenge, and powerful comebacks, don't forget to subscribe for the next part. The Cunningham estate looked like something ripped from the pages of an architectural magazine. White stone, floor-to-ceiling windows, perfect landscaping. A circular driveway lined with imported olive trees Lloyd insisted on shipping from Italy because real success should look expensive. Every morning, Sadie woke up inside that beautiful house, feeling lonelier than she had in her tiny first apartment at 23. That morning, sunlight poured through the massive bedroom windows, while Lloyd stood in front of the mirror adjusting his cufflinks. "You're wearing the navy tonight," he said casually. Sadie sat at the edge of the bed, still emotionally hollow from the gala the night before. The navy, what he barely looked at her. The dress, the one investors like. Investors like. Not Lloyd likes. Not you look beautiful in. Just another carefully managed piece of his image. Sadie stared at his reflection. Tall, sharp jaw, silver watch, perfect hair. Lloyd Cunningham looked like the kind of man who belonged on magazine covers about power and wealth. And once upon a time, Sadie had been proud of that. Now she only saw a stranger. "You're quiet today," Lloyd said. Sadie forced a small smile. "Did you want me to scream?" Finally he looked at her. For half a second, something nervous flickered across his face. But then it disappeared. Lloyd chuckled softly, like she was being dramatic. "You're overthinking things again. Again." That word used to destroy her. Overthinking. Too emotional. Too sensitive. Sadie had heard those words so many times over the years that eventually she started questioning her own instincts. Even when she noticed lipstick on collars. Even when Lloyd stopped touching her. Even when he started protecting his phone like classified government property. He always made her feel irrational for noticing what was right in front of her. And she had let him. For years. "I have a meeting downtown," Lloyd said, grabbing his coat. "Don't forget dinner with my parents tomorrow." Sadie nodded. Lloyd walked toward her, kissed the top of her head absent-mindedly, and left the room while checking his phone. The second the bedroom door closed, Sadie's expression collapsed. Not into tears. That was the strange part. She almost wished she could cry. Instead, she felt numb, like her body had finally grown tired of breaking. Downstairs, the house staff quietly prepared breakfast, while soft piano music played through the hidden speakers. Everything inside the mansion functioned perfectly, including Sadie. Especially Sadie. That had always been her role. Smooth over tension, host the dinners, remember birthdays, manage appearances, protect Lloyd from consequences. She walked into the kitchen where Maria, the longtime housekeeper, looked at her carefully. "You okay, Mrs. Cunningham?" Sadie smiled automatically. "I'm fine." Maria didn't look convinced. Nobody knew Sadie better than the people who watched her survive quietly. An hour later, Sadie sat in the sunroom, staring at old architectural sketches spread across the table. Sketches from another lifetime. Before Lloyd's company. Before the mansion. Before she slowly disappeared into somebody else's success story. Her phone buzzed. Avia Brooks. Sadie answered immediately. "You sound dead," Ava said without greeting. Sadie let out a tired laugh. "That obvious to me always." Ava had known her since college, back before Sadie became polished and careful and emotionally edited. What happened? Sadie hesitated, then quietly said, "I saw them together." Silence. "Oh my God," Ava whispered. "At the gala." "With who?" "Celeste Harper." Ava swore loudly. That smug blonde consultant, Sadie, closed her eyes. "She was wearing my necklace." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Ava said carefully, "And what did Lloyd say?" "He didn't deny it." "Oh, Sadie." But pity suddenly made Sadie feel sick. She stood abruptly and walked toward the windows overlooking the pool. Sadie said quietly, "Don't do that. Do what feels sorry for me." Ava exhaled slowly. "What are you feeling?" Sadie's eyes stared at the water. Nothing. That answer scared even her. Because it was true. The pain had become too large for ordinary emotions. It had hardened into clarity. That evening, Sadie attended another corporate dinner beside Lloyd like nothing had happened. That was the terrifying thing about wealthy marriages. People cared more about comfort than truth. Investors laughed around the table while Lloyd charmed everyone effortlessly. His hand occasionally brushed Sadie's lower back in public like he was still the perfect husband. Performance. Everything was performance. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Sadie," Lloyd Cunningham said from across the table. Lloyd's mother wore diamonds to casual dinners the way normal women wore perfume. Sadie smiled politely. "Just tired." Eleanor sipped wine delicately. "Well, keeping up with Lloyd's schedule can be exhausting." There it was again. That subtle implication that Sadie existed orbiting Lloyd's life instead of having one of her own. Grant Cunningham barely looked up from his steak. "Lloyd mentioned Celeste helped secure the Porter deal," he said. Lloyd nodded proudly. "She's brilliant under pressure." Sadie noticed the way Eleanor smiled approvingly. Not subtle. Not anymore. "She'll be joining us at the yacht party next weekend," Eleanor added casually. Sadie looked up slowly. "Oh, yes," Eleanor continued. "It'll be nice having someone who understands business conversations around." The table went quiet. Lloyd shifted uncomfortably, but didn't defend Sadie. Didn't say Sadie built half my early presentations. Sadie coached me before every investor meeting. Sadie sacrificed her own career so I could build mine. Nothing. Because letting people underestimate Sadie benefited him. Sadie folded her napkin carefully. "I used to understand business conversations," she said softly. Eleanor smiled tightly. "Well, dear, people change." "No. People reveal themselves." That was the real truth. Later that night, Sadie stood alone in her massive dressing room while removing earrings. The silence inside the mansion felt heavier now. Lloyd still wasn't home. Probably with Celeste. The thought should have shattered her. Instead, it sharpened something cold inside her chest. Sadie opened one of the hidden lower drawers beneath her vanity. Inside sat folders, documents, contracts, investment papers. Quiet little pieces of a life Lloyd barely remembered she helped build. Her fingers slowly traced the edge of one document. Lloyd Cunningham, Enterprise's initial funding agreement. Signed 12 years earlier. Signed with her inheritance money. Money from her late grandfather. The grandfather Lloyd used to call old-fashioned until his money funded Lloyd's first office. Sadie sat down slowly. For years, she convinced herself love meant sacrifice, endurance, patience, forgiveness. But suddenly, another question appeared in her mind. What if love, without respect, was just slow destruction? Her phone buzzed again. A text from Lloyd. Staying downtown tonight. Don't wait up. No apology. No explanation. Just expectation. Like she would continue absorbing humiliation forever. Sadie stared at the message for a very long time. Then she quietly stood, walked into her private office and opened her laptop. A hidden, encrypted folder appeared on the screen. Inside were photographs, bank statements, copies of signatures, private investigator reports, months of preparation. Because deep down, some part of Sadie had known this day was coming, long before her heart was ready to admit it. And tonight, for the very first time, she stopped asking herself how to save her marriage, and started asking herself how badly Lloyd Cunningham was about to regret losing her. The yacht party looked like a scene from a billionaire fantasy. Champagne towers glittered beneath golden string lights, while a jazz quartet played near the deck overlooking the dark Atlantic water. Women in silk gowns laughed too loudly. Men in tailored suits discussed mergers, politics, and vacation homes in Aspen. Everything smelled expensive. And fake. Sadie stood near the railing in a midnight blue gown Lloyd had chosen for her years ago. The irony almost made her laugh. He still liked dressing her like a trophy, while sleeping with another woman behind her back. Smile. Lloyd murmured beside her, without looking away from a group of investors approaching. Sadie slowly turned toward him. His jaw tightened slightly. That smile again. That calm, unreadable expression that had begun haunting him ever since the gala. "You're acting strange lately," Lloyd muttered. "Am I?" "Yes." Sadie tilted her head softly. "Maybe you're finally paying attention." Before Lloyd could answer, several investors surrounded them warmly. Lloyd, one man boomed, "Hell of a quarter." Lloyd instantly transformed, charismatic, powerful, magnetic. Sadie watched him perform like she'd watched him perform for years. And the cruelest part, he had once been genuine. Back when they were young and broke and dreaming together inside a tiny apartment with broken heating. Before money turned love into hierarchy. "You must be proud of your husband," one investor's wife told Sadie. Sadie smiled politely. "I used to think I was part of the success too." The woman blinked awkwardly, unsure whether Sadie was joking. Lloyd squeezed Sadie's waist tighter. Warning pressure. Control disguised as affection. Then suddenly, the crowd shifted. Because Celeste Harper had arrived. Every eye turned toward her immediately. Tall, blonde, flawless. The kind of woman magazines called effortless, even though everything about her clearly required enormous effort. She wore a silver dress cut low across her back and confidence like perfume. And beside Sadie, Lloyd subtly straightened. The tiny unconscious reaction hurt more than Sadie expected. Celeste walked directly toward them, carrying a champagne glass. "Sadie," she said sweetly, "you look beautiful tonight." Liar, manipulator, predator. But Sadie only smiled. "So do you." Celeste glanced at Lloyd briefly before touching the diamond necklace around her throat. Sadie's necklace, again. Like she wanted to make sure Sadie noticed it. Like humiliating her was part of the thrill. "I almost didn't come," Celeste said casually. Lloyd insisted. A few nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. There it was. Public disrespect wrapped inside polished conversation. Lloyd rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Celeste helped secure the Wexler account. He explained to nobody in particular. She's invaluable. Sadie felt something cold slide through her chest. Invaluable. 12 years of sacrifice, loyalty, emotional labor, career, abandonment, social hosting, investor networking, and now another woman became invaluable after a few months. Celeste sipped champagne slowly. Lloyd says, "You used to work in architecture," she said. Sadie nodded. "I did." "Oh, that's adorable." Celeste smiled brightly. "I always admire women who can give up ambition for marriage. I could never." Several people looked down immediately, embarrassed, not for Sadie, for witnessing cruelty in public. Lloyd should have stopped it, should have defended her. Instead, he laughed softly into his drink. That was the moment something final snapped loose inside Sadie Cunningham. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a chain finally breaking after years of pressure. Because humiliation changes shape eventually. At first it burns, then it hardens. Sadie looked directly at Celeste. "You're right," she said calmly. "You probably couldn't." Celeste's smile faltered slightly. The tension sharpened instantly. But Sadie simply lifted her champagne glass and walked away gracefully before anyone could respond. Behind her, she could feel Lloyd watching. Confused. Uneasy. Good. Let him feel uncomfortable for once. Inside the yacht's lower hallway, Sadie stepped into the restroom and locked the door behind her. Silence. Finally. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the marble sink. Not from sadness, from fury. She stared at herself in the mirror. Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect wealthy wife. And suddenly, she hated how beautifully she had learned to suffer. A memory flashed through her mind unexpectedly. 26-year-old Lloyd, sitting on their apartment kitchen floor, surrounded by unpaid bills. "I'm sorry," he had whispered back then. "I know I'm failing you." And Sadie had held his face gently and said, "You could never fail me." God. How stupid love could make a woman. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sadie Ava. Sadie opened the door slowly. The moment Ava saw her expression, her face darkened. "Oh no." Sadie laughed quietly. Not a happy laugh, the kind that came right before emotional collapse. She wore the necklace again. Ava looked ready to commit homicide. "I swear to God I will throw that woman into the ocean." Sadie actually smiled at that. "There's more." What Sadie leaned closer. She wanted me to react. Ava frowned. And I didn't. A strange silence settled between them. Because Ava suddenly understood. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was transformation. "What are you planning?" Ava asked carefully. Sadie looked toward the mirror again. "For years, I kept trying to save my marriage," she whispered. And now, Sadie's eyes slowly lifted. "Now I want the truth to cost him something." Upstairs, the party continued louder than before. By the time Sadie returned to the deck, Lloyd was already irritated. "Where were you, bathroom? You disappeared." Sadie stared at him calmly. "You disappeared first, Lloyd." His expression hardened instantly. "Don't do this here." Interesting. He still cared about appearances. Even now. Sadie stepped closer. "You know what's funny?" she said softly. "I used to think if I loved you hard enough, eventually you'd stop hurting me." Sadie. "But people like you don't stop when they're forgiven." Her voice remained frighteningly calm. "You stop when there are consequences." Lloyd glanced around nervously. "Keep your voice down." There it was again. "Not. I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Just panic over image." Sadie suddenly realized something devastating. Lloyd did not fear losing her. He feared looking like the villain. Celeste approached again, sensing tension like blood in water. "Everything okay?" she asked innocently. Sadie looked at her for several long seconds, then smiled. "Yes," she said gently. "Actually, I think everything is finally becoming very clear." For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered across Celeste's face too. Good. Sadie reached for her clutch purse calmly. Inside was her phone, and inside her phone were photographs, private investigator reports, hotel receipts, financial records, months of carefully collected evidence. Because while Lloyd believed Sadie was weak, Sadie had been preparing, quietly, patiently, like women often did when survival depended on silence. The wind carried laughter across the yacht while waves crashed softly below. And standing beneath the golden lights beside the husband who betrayed her, Sadie Cunningham finally stopped feeling like the victim of the story, which meant someone else was about to become one. As the party continued around them, Sadie slipped away toward the private upper deck. Then she unlocked her phone and sent a single text message. To Rebecca Mercer. "Start preparing everything." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Rebecca replied, "Finally." Sadie stared out at the black ocean beyond the yacht. For the first time in months, she felt absolutely nothing toward Lloyd Cunningham, and somehow that terrified her less than staying in love with him. Manhattan looked cold from 38 floors above the city. Rain streaked across the enormous windows of Mercer and Vell LLP, while headlights blurred below like rivers of gold and white. Sadie sat in the corner office, wearing cream cashmere and emotional exhaustion. Across from her, Rebecca Mercer slowly flipped through the document after document spread across the conference table. Silence filled the room, except for the occasional turn of paper. Then Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said finally, "your husband's an idiot." Despite everything, Sadie almost laughed. Rebecca had always been like this. Sharp-tongued, brilliant, ruthlessly honest. Back in college, professors feared her arguments more than exams. Meanwhile, Sadie had been softer, warmer. The girl who believed love and loyalty could fix almost anything. Funny how life punished women like that. Rebecca removed her glasses slowly. "How long have you known?" Sadie stared at the rain outside. "About the affair?" Rebecca nodded. 6 months, Sadie admitted quietly. Rebecca blinked hard. "And you stayed?" The question wasn't judgmental, just stunned. Sadie folded her hands together carefully. "At first I thought I was imagining things. Classic. That was how emotional manipulation worked. Tiny lies, tiny dismissals, tiny humiliations, until the reality itself started feeling negotiable. He kept telling me I was paranoid," Sadie whispered. "Overly emotional. Insecure." Rebecca's expression darkened. "Of course he did." Sadie swallowed hard. "And then I started finding things. Hotel receipts, private dinners, late-night calls, a woman's perfume on his jackets. Each discovery like another crack spreading through 12 years of marriage. But even then," Sadie paused painfully. "Part of me still wanted to save him." Rebecca looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said softly. "You wanted to save the version of him you fell in love with." That landed harder than Sadie expected. Because it was true. Lloyd used to love her openly. Before money, before status, before power became the center of his personality. There had once been a man who danced with Sadie barefoot in tiny kitchens and kissed her forehead while promising they'd build a beautiful life together. And maybe that was the cruelest part of betrayal. Not that the love was fake, but that it changed into something unrecognizable. Rebecca returned to the documents. "These financial records are ugly." How ugly? Rebecca slid several pages across the table. "Your husband's company moved money through 3 separate shell accounts during merger negotiations. Sadie frowned. Illegal? Potentially. Rebecca tapped another document. And these signatures, Sadie's stomach tightened immediately. They're mine, Rebecca corrected coldly. They're attempts at yours. The room suddenly felt smaller. Sadie picked up the paper slowly. Her signature stared back at her from the bottom of the page, except it wasn't hers. Close, but wrong, slightly shakier, too deliberate. Oh my God, Rebecca nodded grimly. He forged legal authorization. Sadie's chest tightened violently. Not because she was shocked Lloyd would betray her anymore, but because she suddenly understood how disposable he believed she was. He wasn't just cheating, he was preparing protection, an exit strategy, a scapegoat. He used me, Sadie whispered. Rebecca's eyes softened slightly. No, she said carefully. He underestimated you. A dangerous difference. Thunder echoed outside while Rebecca continued reviewing files. Then suddenly, she stopped. What's this? Sadie looked down. A much older document sat near the bottom of the pile. Lloyd Cunningham, Enterprise's initial investment structure. Rebecca scanned it once. Then again, slower, then her eyes widened. Sadie. Well? Rebecca looked up carefully. You own part of his company. Sadie blinked. What is holding structure? Rebecca pointed to several clauses. Your grandfather's inheritance trust funded the original launch capital. Sadie stared blankly. I know that. No, I don't think you do. Rebecca's voice sharpened. Lloyd restructured ownership years later, but this original filing was never fully dissolved. Sadie's pulse began accelerating. So what does that mean? Rebecca sat back slowly. It means your husband built his empire partially using your money. Sadie's breathing became shallow. And legally, she asked. Rebecca smiled for the first time that evening. It means Lloyd Cunningham accidentally made his wife a stakeholder. For several seconds, Sadie could only stare. All these years. She thought she had disappeared inside Lloyd's success story. But traces of her fingerprints were everywhere. Not just emotionally, legally, financially, foundationally. Rebecca continued reading, and honestly, she muttered, half these early investor strategies sound more like you than him. Sadie looked away. They were mine. Rebecca froze. What Sadie gave a small, exhausted shrug. In the beginning, Lloyd hated networking events. He got nervous before presentations. Flashbacks flooded her mind instantly. Lloyd pacing tiny apartments in wrinkled shirts. Sadie rewriting his pitches at 2 in the morning, coaching him before meetings, teaching him how to read investors emotionally. He used to practice speeches with me for hours, Sadie whispered. Rebecca stared at her like she was finally seeing the full picture. You built that man. Sadie laughed painfully. No. I loved him. Another silence. Then Rebecca asked quietly, when did you stop loving yourself? That one hurt. Because Sadie didn't have an answer. Maybe slowly. Maybe invisibly. Maybe one compromise at a time. The room darkened as evening deepened outside. Rebecca closed the folder firmly. Listen to me carefully. Sadie looked up. You are not weak because you stayed, Rebecca said. You're weak if you keep volunteering for your own destruction. The words settled deep. For years, Sadie believed endurance made her noble. But what if endurance without boundaries was just self-abandonment? Rebecca stood and walked toward the window. You know what men like Lloyd fear most. Sadie shook her head. Losing control. Not losing love, not losing morality. Control. Rebecca turned back toward her. That's why your silence is terrifying him. Sadie frowned slightly. He doesn't look terrified. Oh, he absolutely is. Rebecca smiled coldly. Because emotional men scream, dangerous women get quiet. A chill moved through Sadie's body. Because deep down, she knew Rebecca was right. Lloyd expected tears, begging, chaos. Not calm, not patience, not preparation. Rebecca returned to the table. We need to move carefully, she said. No emotional confrontations, no threats. Let him keep underestimating you. Sadie nodded slowly. I can do that. Good. Meanwhile, I'll start preparing financial investigations and ownership challenges. Sadie exhaled shakily. Everything suddenly felt real now. Not fantasy, not heartbreak. War. Rebecca softened slightly. One more thing. What? If this becomes public? Rebecca hesitated. The media fallout could destroy him. Sadie looked down at her wedding ring, the ring she once treasured more than anything. Now it felt strangely heavy. I don't want to destroy him, she whispered. Rebecca studied her carefully. That's why you'll win. Sadie frowned slightly. What does that mean? People driven only by revenge become reckless, Rebecca said. But people driven by truth? Her expression hardened. They become unstoppable. The city lights glowed behind them while Sadie slowly removed her wedding ring for the first time in 12 years. Not dramatically, not angrily, quietly, like removing something already dead. She placed it gently on the table. Rebecca stared at the ring, then at Sadie, then finally said the words that changed everything. Sadie, Lloyd Cunningham has absolutely no idea how dangerous you are. And for the first time since discovering the affair, Sadie finally started believing it too. The strange thing about heartbreak was how ordinary mornings still looked afterward. The coffee still brewed, the sun still rose over the manicured lawns of Westport, and Lloyd Cunningham still kissed his wife goodbye like he wasn't actively destroying her life behind her back. You'll be at the merger dinner Friday, right? Lloyd asked while buttoning his navy coat. Sadie stood near the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone calmly. Of course. Lloyd watched her carefully. That suspicion again. He kept waiting for an explosion that never came. And every day her silence unsettled him more. You've been distant lately, he said cautiously. Sadie almost smiled. Distant. As if betrayal wasn't distance. As if another woman wearing her jewelry wasn't distance. Instead, she simply asked, Are you worried about me? Lloyd hesitated. Should I be? Interesting answer. Not, I care about you. Not, I'm sorry. Just calculation. Sadie looked up slowly. No, she said softly. You should probably worry about yourself. For a split second, genuine confusion crossed his face. Then his phone buzzed. Celeste. Sadie recognized the contact photo immediately. Lloyd turned the screen over too quickly. Guilt had reflexes. I have to go, he muttered. Sadie nodded politely. Drive safe. He lingered another second, studying her expression, trying to read her, trying to figure out what she knew. But Lloyd had spent years misunderstanding his wife. That was his first fatal mistake. The second he left, Sadie's calm expression vanished, not into grief, into focus. She walked directly into Lloyd's private home office. The room smelled like a leather whiskey and expensive cologne. Power, male ego, artificial success. Sadie closed the door quietly behind her and moved toward his desk. Months ago, searching through his things would have made her physically sick with guilt. Now she understood something painful. Loyalty to someone disloyal was self-destruction. She opened his desk drawer carefully. Financial folders, investor agreements, merger drafts. Then suddenly, there. A black folder labeled Confidential Internal Liability. Sadie's pulse slowed instead of racing. That frightened her sometimes. How calm she had become. She opened the file slowly. Pages of projected merger profits, tax restructuring, hidden transfers. Then, one document made her blood run cold. Authorization approval. Sadie Cunningham. Her signature sat at the bottom. Except it wasn't hers. Again. This time, cleaner. More practiced. Like Lloyd had forged it repeatedly. Sadie stared at the paper for a very long time. Then, quietly photographed every page. By the time she finished, her hands no longer trembled at all. That scared her too. Not the anxiety, the absence of emotion inside it. Later that afternoon, Sadie met Ava at a quiet cafe overlooking the marina. Ava arrived wearing oversized sunglasses and immediate concern. "You look terrifying," she said while sitting down. Sadie blinked. "That's a strange greeting." "No, seriously." Ava lowered her voice. "You look calm in a way that makes me think somebody's about to disappear." For the first time in weeks, Sadie laughed genuinely. Small, but real. Ava softened instantly hearing it. "There she is." Sadie looked out toward the water. "I found forged signatures this morning." Ava nearly choked on her coffee. "What Lloyd's moving money during the merger, and somehow my name keeps appearing on documents I never signed." Ava's expression darkened immediately. "Oh, hell no." Sadie nodded once. He was preparing to protect himself. "By framing you?" "Possibly." Ava stared at her in disbelief. 12 years together, and this man really thought he could throw you under the bus. Sadie gave a hollow smile. "I spent years making his life easier. Men like Lloyd eventually confuse devotion with weakness." Ava leaned forward carefully. "And what are you going to do?" Sadie thought about Rebecca's words. "Let him keep underestimating you?" "I'm going to let him feel safe," Sadie said quietly. Ava frowned. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." For Lloyd. That evening, the Cunningham mansion hosted another networking dinner. Another performance. Another carefully staged illusion of perfection. Sadie wore a cream silk dress while greeting guests with effortless elegance. Investors complimented the house. Wives admired the decor. Lloyd moved through the room charming everyone exactly the way he always had. And for the first time, Sadie saw the performance clearly. Every laugh slightly rehearsed. Every compliment strategic. Every touch calculated. Even his affection toward her in public now looked artificial. Like branding. At one point, Lloyd wrapped an arm around her waist while speaking to two investors. "My wife keeps everything together," he said smoothly. Everyone laughed warmly. Sadie smiled beautifully. But internally, she almost shattered from the irony. Because behind closed doors, Lloyd barely looked at her anymore unless he needed something. One investor's wife touched Sadie's arm gently. "You and Lloyd are relationship goals." The sentence hit like physical pain. Relationship goals. If only women knew how many glamorous marriages were actually emotional graveyards. Later, while guests wandered toward dessert, Sadie quietly stepped into the hallway. That was when she heard Lloyd's voice from his office. The door wasn't fully closed. She suspects something he muttered. Celeste's voice answered through speakerphone. "The divorce, her before the merger finalizes." Sadie froze completely. Lloyd sighed heavily. "You think I don't know that?" Celeste laughed softly. "She'll survive. Women like Sadie always survive. They cry for a while, redecorate a beach house, then move on. Sadie felt ice spread through her chest. Women like Sadie. Disposable women. Safe women. Forgiving women. Then Lloyd said something that finally killed whatever remained of her denial. "She won't fight me," he said confidently. The certainty in his voice hurt more than the affair itself, because Lloyd truly believed Sadie had no power outside loving him. Celeste lowered her voice. "And the financial issue?" A pause. Then Lloyd answered carefully. "If anything surfaces, the approvals trace back to Sadie." Silence. Pure silence inside Sadie's body. Not heartbreak anymore. Not grief. Something colder. Something sharper. Because suddenly, the entire marriage rearranged itself in her mind. Every manipulation, every dismissal, every time Lloyd called her emotional while secretly preparing betrayal behind her back. This wasn't weakness. This was strategy. And Lloyd thought he was the only strategist in the marriage. Sadie quietly stepped away before they could notice her. Her heels clicked softly against marble floors while laughter echoed through the mansion downstairs. Guests sipping champagne. Classical music floating through the air. Nobody realizing a marriage had just died upstairs. In her dressing room, Sadie locked the door and opened her laptop immediately. The encrypted folder appeared again. Methodically, she uploaded new evidence, recorded notes, timeline updates, financial copies. Every detail organized perfectly. Not emotional, precise. Her phone buzzed suddenly. "Rebecca." "Any updates?" the message read. Sadie stared at the screen briefly before typing, "He plans to blame me if the merger investigation fails." 3 dots appeared instantly. "Then good. That means he still thinks you're weak." Sadie leaned back slowly in her chair. Downstairs, Lloyd laughed loudly at something one of the investors said. That sound once made her feel proud. Now it sounded hollow. Like listening to a man celebrate inside a building already burning. Sadie opened the printer beside her desk. One by one, pages began sliding out. Forged signatures. Offshore transfers. Hidden liabilities. Evidence. By the time the printer stopped, a thick stack of documents sat waiting. Sadie placed them carefully into a black leather folder. Then she rested her hand on top of it and closed her eyes briefly. 12 years of love, reduced to paperwork and betrayal. When she finally opened her eyes again, the grief was still there. But something else had grown larger than the grief now. Resolve. And downstairs, Lloyd Cunningham continued entertaining guests completely unaware that the woman he underestimated most was already preparing to destroy the life he thought only he controlled. The charity gala took place inside the Grand Aurora Hotel in Manhattan, where wealth dripped from every chandelier and every woman smelled like expensive perfume and carefully hidden misery. Sadie stood near the ballroom entrance while photographers captured guests arriving beneath gold lighting and velvet banners. Tonight's event was supposed to celebrate children's hospitals. Instead, it felt like a parade of ego. "You look stunning," Ava whispered beside her. Sadie adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist mechanically. "Thank you." Ava studied her face carefully. "You sure you're okay doing this tonight?" "No." But Sadie was beginning to understand something important. Women like Lloyd Cunningham and Celeste Harper survived because most people feared discomfort more than humiliation. They counted on silence. They counted on women protecting social harmony while being emotionally gutted in public. Sadie was done protecting people who enjoyed hurting her. "I'm fine," she said calmly. That answer worried Ava more than tears ever could. Across the ballroom, Lloyd stood surrounded by executives, already drinking whiskey, and performing charm for investors. Then he noticed Sadie, and for a brief second, his expression softened, not with guilt, with possession. Like seeing his wife appear beautiful beside him restored part of his image. The realization made Sadie feel physically cold. Lloyd walked toward her immediately. "There you are." He kissed her cheek for the cameras. "Perfect husband. Perfect marriage. Perfect lie." "You're late," he murmured quietly. "I wasn't aware you still noticed when I arrived." His jaw tightened. "There's no need for attitude." Sadie smiled faintly. Funny. Men called it attitude when women stopped pretending. Before Lloyd could answer, another voice interrupted. "Oh my God, Sadie. Celeste, of course." She approached in a silver satin gown, so tight it looked poured onto her body. Several men openly stared as she walked past. Celeste loved attention the way some people loved oxygen. Necessary. Constant. And tonight, she looked especially pleased with herself. "You two look amazing together," she said sweetly. The lie floated between them like poison wrapped in silk. Sadie noticed immediately that Celeste was wearing Lloyd's favorite perfume. Not her own. His favorite. Calculated. Everything about Celeste was calculated. "You look beautiful," Sadie replied politely. Celeste smiled wider. "Lloyd helped me pick the dress." There it was. Another tiny knife disguised as conversation. Lloyd looked uncomfortable now. "Good." Celeste turned toward him playfully. "You never told me Sadie was this calm." Sadie caught it immediately. The challenge. Celeste wanted a reaction, wanted tears, wanted emotional chaos. She could later mock privately with Lloyd. But Sadie simply tilted her head. "And you never told me Celeste needed this much validation." Silence. Sharp. Immediate. Celeste blinked once. Lloyd looked genuinely startled. Ava nearly choked on champagne nearby. For the first time all evening, Celeste's confidence cracked slightly. But only slightly. She recovered fast. Women like Celeste always did. Well, Celeste laughed lightly. Some women enjoy being admired. Sadie smiled calmly. And some women confuse attention with worth. That one landed. Hard. Several nearby guests suddenly became very interested in their drinks. Because now the tension was impossible to ignore. Lloyd lowered his voice sharply. "Sadie." Warning tone. Control tone. The tone husbands used when they expected obedience. But Sadie wasn't afraid of him anymore, and Lloyd hadn't realized yet how dangerous that was. Dinner began shortly afterward inside the ballroom. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers, while donors applauded speeches about generosity and compassion. The irony almost made Sadie laugh out loud. Compassion. Most people in this room couldn't even offer basic human decency to their spouses. Sadie sat beside Lloyd at the main table, while Celeste sat directly across from them. Intentional, of course. Halfway through dinner, one of the investors asked Lloyd about the merger deal. "We're in the final stages," Lloyd said confidently. "Big things coming." Celeste touched his arm affectionately beneath the table. Not subtle, not accidental. Sadie noticed several wives exchange uncomfortable glances. Everyone knew now. Nobody said anything. That was how elite social circles worked. They tolerated cruelty as long as it stayed elegant. Then Celeste took another sip of wine and smiled toward Sadie. "I honestly don't know how you survived corporate wife life for so long," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Sadie dabbed her lips with a napkin calmly. "What do you mean?" "Oh, come on." Celeste laughed, always smiling. "Hosting dinners. Standing behind your husband while he builds an empire." Her eyes glittered cruelly. I'd lose my mind. Lloyd shifted uncomfortably. But again, no defense, no protection, nothing. Sadie stared at him for a long moment and suddenly understood something devastating. Lloyd enjoyed watching women compete for him. The admiration, the ego, the power. He wasn't stopping Celeste because part of him liked seeing Sadie diminished. That realization hurt more than the cheating, because betrayal was terrible. But emotional enjoyment of humiliation, that was cruelty. Celeste leaned closer across the table. Honestly, Sadie, her smile sharpened. You're stronger than me, especially after everything. The room quieted slightly. Sadie's eyes lifted slowly. Everything Celeste gave fake sympathy. The fertility treatments, the stress, the distance in your marriage. There it was. Public humiliation. Deliberate, precise, cruel. Ava's face turned murderous instantly. Lloyd looked horrified. Not because Celeste crossed a line, because now people were staring. Sadie felt something inside her chest go perfectly still. For years, infertility had been her deepest private grief. Years of doctors, hormones, hope, loss, crying alone in hospital bathrooms while Lloyd increasingly buried himself in work. And now another woman used that pain as entertainment. A younger version of Sadie would have shattered right there. But this version had finally stopped confusing softness with surrender. Sadie looked directly at Celeste, then smiled. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile. You know, Sadie said gently, I used to wonder what kind of woman knowingly sleeps with a married man. Celeste's expression tightened. The ballroom had gone nearly silent now. Sadie continued softly. But now I understand. Lloyd whispered sharply. Sadie, stop. She ignored him completely. It's the kind of woman who needs stolen validation because she's terrified she'll never be chosen honestly. Dead silence. Even the musician seemed quieter somehow. Celeste's face flushed instantly. You don't know anything about me. Sadie tilted her head. No. But I know women like you. The tension became suffocating. Then Celeste made her fatal mistake. Drunk on arrogance and attention, she laughed bitterly. Please. Lloyd already promised me that house after the divorce anyway. The words hit the table like a bomb. Lloyd went white instantly. Celeste. But it was too late. Several investors looked visibly shocked. A wife at the next table whispered, "Oh my God." And Sadie remained perfectly calm, because hidden beneath the table inside her clutch purse, her phone was recording everything, every insult, every admission, every humiliating little truth. Celeste finally realized what she'd done. Her expression shifted. Fear. Tiny. But there. Lloyd looked at Sadie desperately now. Sadie, she's drunk. Interesting. Not, that's not true. Just, she's drunk. Sadie slowly stood from the table. Elegant. Controlled. Untouchable. I suddenly don't feel very hungry, she said softly. Then she looked at Celeste one final time. You should be careful, Sadie whispered calmly. Sometimes people mistake silence for weakness right before they lose everything. And for the first time since the affair began, Celeste Harper looked genuinely afraid of her. As Sadie walked away across the glittering ballroom, she could feel hundreds of eyes following her. But she no longer felt humiliated. Because humiliation only worked when someone accepted shame that didn't belong to them. And tonight, for the very first time, Sadie Cunningham handed all that shame back where it belonged, directly to Lloyd. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not through a heartfelt conversation, not through honesty. Through a man in a grey suit standing at the front door while Sadie drank coffee alone in the sunroom. Mrs. Cunningham, the process server, asked carefully, Sadie looked at the envelope once and immediately understood. Funny. 12 years of a marriage reduced to certified documents and legal formatting. Maria, the housekeeper, froze near the kitchen doorway. Oh my God. Sadie accepted the envelope calmly. Thank you. The man actually looked uncomfortable handing it to her. Probably because Sadie didn't look hysterical enough for the role people expected betrayed women to play. After he left, Sadie stared at the papers for several silent seconds. Then she laughed quietly, not because it was funny, because Lloyd still thought he was in control. Her phone buzzed immediately afterward. Lloyd. Of course. Sadie answered calmly. You had me served at home. Lloyd exhaled heavily on the other end. Sadie, don't make this uglier than it has to be. Interesting choice of words. As if he wasn't the one sleeping with another woman while forging documents behind her back. You're divorcing me through lawyers, Sadie replied softly. I think we passed ugly already. Silence. Then Lloyd lowered his voice into that careful corporate tone he used when managing difficult situations. This is the cleanest option for both of us. Clean. That word almost disgusted her. There was nothing clean about emotional betrayal, nothing clean about humiliation, nothing clean about trying to frame your wife for financial misconduct. But Lloyd still wanted to package cruelty professionally. You should start looking for another place, he continued. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially. Sadie slowly stood from her chair. Another place. The house will obviously need to be sold. Obviously. God. The arrogance. Sadie walked slowly toward the massive living room windows overlooking the estate. The house she designed. The gardens she planned. The home she turned beautiful, while Lloyd treated it like another symbol of status. You seem very confident, she said quietly. Lloyd sighed impatiently. Sadie, please don't do this. Do what pretend. This is a shock. There it was again. That emotional cruelty disguised as practicality. Like her pain was inconvenient now that he had moved on emotionally. Sadie closed her eyes briefly. You know what's interesting, Lloyd? What for years I thought your worst quality was selfishness. A pause. And now Sadie's voice became dangerously soft. Now I realize it's entitlement. Before he could answer, she hung up. No tears, no begging, nothing. And somehow, that frightened Lloyd far more than emotional collapse ever would have. That evening, Lloyd returned home earlier than usual. Sadie heard him enter through the front hall while she sat quietly in the library reviewing documents. He loosened his tie as he walked in, already irritated. You hung up on me. Sadie turned another page calmly. You sent divorce papers to the house. I was trying to avoid drama. She looked up finally. Lloyd's expression shifted slightly at whatever he saw in her face. Not grief, not desperation, distance. I'm not fighting you, Lloyd, she said softly. Relief flickered across his face instantly. That almost made her sick. Because his greatest concern wasn't losing her. It was inconvenience. Good, he said. That's good. Then he made the mistake that changed everything. We can handle this maturely. Maturely. Sadie nearly smiled. Men loved calling women emotional until those same women stopped crying. Then suddenly they wanted maturity. Lloyd poured himself whiskey at the bar. We should discuss division of assets. Sadie closed the folder carefully. Absolutely. I'll have attorneys handle most of it. Of course. The house situation may take time, but Sadie interrupted quietly. What house situation? Lloyd frowned. The estate? She tilted her head slightly. You mean my estate? Silence. A strange silence. Lloyd actually looked confused. What Sadie stood slowly. Elegant, calm, controlled. The house belongs to me. Lloyd stared at her. No, it doesn't. It does. That's ridiculous. Sadie almost pitied him then. Almost. Because Lloyd Cunningham had spent so many years dismissing his wife intellectually that he genuinely never imagined she protected herself legally. I bought this property before our marriage, Sadie explained calmly. Using family inheritance funds. Lloyd laughed once, short, disbelieving. That's not possible. It's very possible. His expression hardened immediately. Sadie. Lloyd. You're confused. There it was. That old tactic again. Make her doubt reality. Except it no longer worked. Sadie walked toward the hallway calmly. Actually, she said softly, I invited someone over to help clarify. The front door opened moments later. Rebecca Mercer entered carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of confidence that made powerful men nervous. Lloyd's face darkened instantly. Oh, you got a lawyer? Rebecca smiled coldly. Oh, sweetheart. She got a lot more than that. Lloyd looked between them suspiciously. What is this? Rebecca calmly placed several folders across the dining table. Property records, she said. Original purchase agreements. Trust documentation, ownership filings. Lloyd's jaw tightened as he flipped through pages. Then slowly, the color drained from his face. Because every document said the same thing. Sole legal owner, Sadie Cunningham. No, Lloyd whispered. Rebecca folded her hands. Yes. This doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, Rebecca replied. You just never bothered learning how your wife protected herself financially. Lloyd looked at Sadie like he'd never seen her before. When were you going to tell me this? Sadie almost laughed. You never asked. His breathing sharpened. This is our marital residence. No, Rebecca corrected smoothly. It is Sadie's premarital asset protected under inheritance law. Lloyd slammed the papers down suddenly. This is manipulation. That word, coming from him, the irony was breathtaking. Sadie looked at him quietly. You brought your mistress into my home plans before even divorcing me. Lloyd froze. You promised Celeste this house, Sadie continued calmly. Remember? For the first time all night, genuine panic entered his eyes. Because now he realized something terrifying. Sadie knew more than he thought. Much more. Eleanor Cunningham stormed into the house less than an hour later, after Lloyd apparently called his mother in desperation. What the hell is going on? She snapped immediately. Rebecca remained seated calmly. Good evening to you too. Eleanor ignored her completely. Sadie, stop this nonsense right now. Sadie looked almost amused. Nonsense. You're embarrassing this family. There it was. Not Lloyd betrayed you. Not, are you okay? Just image. Always image. Sadie stood slowly. You know what's embarrassing? She asked softly. Eleanor crossed her arms. What, raising a man who mistakes loyalty for weakness? The room went still. Lloyd looked exhausted now, like control was slipping through his fingers faster than he could process. Rebecca opened another folder calmly. And unfortunately, she added the property situation may not be Mr. Cunningham's only legal concern. Lloyd's eyes snapped toward her immediately. What does that mean? Rebecca smiled faintly. It means your company ownership structure may also deserve closer examination. Pure fear flashed across Lloyd's face. Gone in a second, but Sadie saw it. For the first time since the betrayal began, Lloyd Cunningham looked genuinely afraid. And suddenly, Sadie understood something powerful. Men like Lloyd only respected consequences. Not love, not sacrifice, not devotion. Consequences. As Eleanor continued shouting and Lloyd demanded explanations, Sadie quietly stepped toward the staircase.
emotionally detached from the chaos unfolding beneath her own roof. Because for years she had mistaken endurance for strength.
But real strength was finally refusing to protect people committed to hurting you. And downstairs, Lloyd Cunningham was beginning to realize his wife was no longer protecting him at all. The executive boardroom on the 42nd floor of Cunningham Global overlooked all of Manhattan. Glass walls, steel architecture, a skyline built by people obsessed with power. Lloyd loved this room. He once told Sadie it made him feel untouchable. That memory almost made her smile now. Because this morning, Lloyd Cunningham looked anything but untouchable. Sadie stepped out of the private elevator, wearing a cream-colored suit Rebecca helped her choose specifically for today. Elegant, controlled, unforgettable. Not the soft society wife people expected. A woman prepared for war. Rebecca walked beside her carrying a leather portfolio, while two junior attorneys followed behind them. "You ready?" Rebecca asked quietly. Sadie glanced toward the boardroom doors. Inside, she could already hear voices. Investors, executives, Lloyd, Celeste. The merger meeting. The meeting Lloyd believed would secure his legacy. Sadie inhaled slowly. "No," she admitted. Rebecca smirked faintly. "Good. Fear keeps people sharp." Then the doors opened. Conversation inside the room died instantly. Every head turned toward Sadie. Shock moved across the table in visible waves. Because wives did not enter rooms like this. Not during mergers. Not during damage control. Not during male power rituals. Lloyd stood immediately. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sadie noticed several investors watching closely now. Especially Martin Keller, the oldest board member. He looked fascinated. Rebecca answered before Sadie could. "My client has business interests connected to today's proceedings." Celeste's face tightened immediately. Lloyd laughed once in disbelief. "This is inappropriate." Rebecca calmly slid documents onto the conference table. "No," she said. "Forgery is inappropriate." Pure silence. Heavy. Violent. Lloyd's expression changed instantly. Not anger. Calculation. Danger. "Everyone," he said carefully. "I think we should postpone this discussion." "No," Sadie said softly. His eyes snapped toward her. For years, Sadie avoided confrontation inside Lloyd's professional world. She made him comfortable, safe, untouchable. Today was different. Today, she looked him directly in the eyes and realized she no longer feared disappointing him. That freedom felt almost holy. Martin Keller cleared his throat awkwardly. "Lloyd, what exactly is happening?" Rebecca opened the first folder methodically. "My client has evidence of unauthorized financial transfers connected to this merger." Several executives immediately stiffened. Celeste glanced nervously toward Lloyd. "Interesting." "Fear already." Lloyd forced a laugh. "This is absurd." Rebecca placed another document on the table. "Is it?" Sadie watched Lloyd's face carefully as he recognized the forged signature pages. Color drained slowly from his skin. "There must be some misunderstanding," he said. Rebecca's smile sharpened. "There isn't." The room shifted emotionally then. Subtle, but important. Powerful men sensed weakness quickly. And for the first time in years, Lloyd looked vulnerable. Sadie stepped forward calmly. "You used my name on financial authorizations I never signed." Lloyd lowered his voice dangerously. "We'll discuss this privately." "No," Sadie replied softly. "We won't." Celeste suddenly stood. "This is insane," she snapped. "You can't interrupt a merger because of marital drama." Rebecca looked almost delighted. "Oh, good," she said coldly. "The mistress is speaking now." Several board members visibly winced. Celeste flushed instantly. Lloyd rubbed his forehead hard. "Rebecca!" "No," Rebecca interrupted sharply. "You don't get to control this room anymore." That sentence landed harder than anyone expected. Because it was true. Lloyd had built his empire through dominance, charm, pressure, image. And suddenly, none of those things were working. Sadie slowly looked around the room. Men in expensive suits. People who once smiled at her politely while dismissing her as decorative. Now they watched her differently, carefully, like they were re-evaluating years of assumptions. "Good. You all know me as Lloyd's wife," Sadie said calmly. Nobody interrupted. "But 12 years ago, before Cunningham Global existed, I funded the company's first operating office through my inheritance trust." Several executives looked stunned. Martin frowned. What Lloyd spoke immediately. "That's irrelevant." "No," Sadie said quietly. "It isn't." Rebecca slid another set of documents across the table. "Original investment structures," she explained. "Mrs. Cunningham retains minority ownership interests that were never legally dissolved." Silence exploded across the room. One investor actually whispered, "Oh my God!" Celeste turned toward Lloyd sharply. "You told me she had nothing." There it was, the real fear. Not love, money. Lloyd looked furious now. At the time, she didn't. Sadie almost laughed at that. At the time, like she had once been useful inventory. Martin Keller adjusted his glasses slowly while reviewing the paperwork. "Lloyd," he said carefully, "why was the board unaware of this ownership issue?" Lloyd's jaw flexed violently. "Because it was insignificant." Rebecca smiled. "Funny thing about insignificant women," she said. "Men usually realize their value right before everything collapses." Sadie noticed several investors exchange uncomfortable glances. The atmosphere inside the room had changed completely now. Not admiration, suspicion. And suspicion killed deals faster than lawsuits. Celeste tried recovering control. "This is emotional manipulation," she argued. "She's upset about the divorce and trying to sabotage Lloyd." Sadie turned toward her calmly. "No," she said softly. "If I wanted revenge, I would have exposed the affair publicly months ago." That shut the room down instantly. Because everyone suddenly realized something important. Sadie had protected Lloyd, even after betrayal, even after humiliation, which made her current appearance far more terrifying. Martin leaned back slowly. "Is there more we need to know?" Rebecca opened the final folder. "Yes." Lloyd's voice dropped sharply. "Don't." Rebecca ignored him completely. "Evidence suggests financial liability may have been intentionally redirected toward Mrs. Cunningham through forged authorization structures." The room erupted immediately. "What, Jesus Christ? Lloyd, tell me that's not true." Celeste stepped backward slowly, like even she hadn't known the full extent. And Sadie just watched, not happily, not cruelly, just clearly. Because for years, Lloyd believed intelligence belonged only to powerful men in expensive suits. Meanwhile, Sadie quietly learned everything beside him. Every investor weakness, every negotiation pattern, every legal vulnerability. Lloyd taught her the game while assuming she would never play it. That was his greatest mistake. "I built this company," Lloyd snapped suddenly. The desperation in his voice shocked everyone. "I sacrificed everything for this." Sadie looked at him carefully. "No," she said softly. His eyes met hers. "You sacrificed everyone for this." Dead silence. Lloyd stared at her like she had physically struck him. Because deep down, he knew it was true. His marriage, his integrity, his humanity.
Everything became secondary once power entered the equation. Martin closed the folder slowly. "We're suspending merger proceedings, effective immediately."
The sentence hit Lloyd like a gunshot. "What pending internal investigation? You can't do that. We absolutely can." Lloyd turned toward the investors desperately. "This is temporary. This is emotional chaos, not corporate misconduct." Rebecca folded her arms. "Forgery is corporate misconduct." Celeste grabbed her purse abruptly. "I'm not staying for this." Interesting. The first crack in loyalty always came fast when consequences appeared. Lloyd looked at her sharply. Celeste. But she wouldn't meet his eyes anymore, because suddenly Lloyd no longer looked powerful. He looked radioactive, and ambitious people never drown beside sinking men. Sadie watched realization slowly destroy him in real time. The merger, his image, his control, everything slipping. And for the first time since the affair began, Lloyd Cunningham finally understood what it felt like to stand powerless while someone else decided his future. The meeting dissolved into chaos around them. Executives arguing, phones buzzing, lawyers speaking urgently. But Sadie remained perfectly still, emotionally detached from the destruction unfolding. Because revenge wasn't screaming. It wasn't hysteria. Real revenge was truth arriving publicly after someone spent years betting on your silence. As Rebecca gathered documents beside her, Lloyd stepped closer one final time. His voice dropped low. "You planned this." Sadie looked directly into his eyes. "No," she said softly. "You did." Then she turned and walked out of the boardroom, while behind her, Lloyd Cunningham realized he might lose his company, his reputation, and possibly his freedom. All because he mistook a kind woman for a weak one. 3 days after the merger collapsed, Eleanor Cunningham arrived at the estate unannounced. Not with concern, not with apology, with fury. Sadie saw her expensive black SUV pull into the circular driveway just after sunset, while rain poured steadily over the property. Maria peeked through the kitchen window nervously. "Mrs. Cunningham Sr. is here." Sadie looked up slowly from the architectural sketches spread across the dining table. Interesting. Eleanor never visited unless she wanted something. "Let her in," Sadie said calmly. A few moments later, Eleanor entered the mansion wearing pearl earrings, a camel wool coat, and the expression of a woman deeply offended that consequences existed. She stopped inside the foyer and looked around sharply. "You redecorated?" Sadie glanced toward the freshly changed living room flowers. "Yes." The small answer irritated Eleanor immediately. "Good." For years, Sadie would have rushed to ease tension, to make Eleanor comfortable. Now she finally understood something painful. Some people interpreted kindness as submission. Eleanor removed her gloves slowly. "Where's Lloyd?" Sadie closed her sketchbook. "I wouldn't know." That was technically true. Lloyd had barely been home since the boardroom disaster. News of the suspended merger had spread quickly through Manhattan financial circles. Investors were panicking. Lawyers were circling. Articles were beginning to appear online. And suddenly, Lloyd Cunningham, the untouchable corporate golden man, looked vulnerable. Eleanor walked farther into the room. "This has gone far enough." Sadie almost smiled. There it was. "I'm sorry for what my son did. No, you deserved better. Just stop making this inconvenient for us." Sadie leaned back in her chair quietly. What exactly has gone far enough? Eleanor's jaw tightened. The public embarrassment. The legal attacks. The board investigation. Sadie stared at her calmly. "Lloyd forged my signature. He made mistakes." The simplicity of the sentence stunned her. Mistakes? Like betrayal was an accounting error. Like emotional abuse was paperwork. Like trying to financially sacrifice his wife was unfortunate but understandable. Sadie looked at Eleanor for a very long time. And suddenly, years of memories rearranged themselves perfectly. Every subtle insult, every comparison, every moment Eleanor treated Sadie like temporary decoration instead of family. It had never been accidental. Eleanor genuinely believed her son's ambition mattered more than Sadie's humanity. "You knew," Sadie said quietly. Eleanor frowned. "Knew what about Celeste?" A pause. Too long. Then Eleanor sighed dramatically and sat down across from her. "I knew Lloyd was unhappy. Not denial. Confirmation." Sadie felt something deep inside her chest harden permanently. And instead of telling him to respect his marriage, she whispered, "You encouraged him to replace me." Eleanor crossed her arms. "You want honesty?" "Yes." "Fine." Her voice sharpened immediately. "You were never right for Lloyd." There it was. The truth, underneath years of polite cruelty. Sadie remained completely still. Eleanor continued mercilessly. "You're too soft, too emotional. Lloyd needs someone ambitious beside him, funny. Because once upon a time, Lloyd loved Sadie specifically for her softness. Before the corporate world convinced him empathy was weakness. Sadie looked down briefly at her wedding ring sitting abandoned on the table nearby. "I gave up my career to support him. And that was your choice." The sentence landed like ice water. No compassion, no acknowledgement, just dismissal. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "You built your whole life around being Lloyd's wife. Don't blame him, because that stopped being enough." Sadie actually laughed softly then. Not happily, almost sadly. Because for years, Eleanor's approval mattered to her. Pathetic, really. She spent holidays trying harder, smiling bigger, serving more, shrinking herself smaller. All for a woman who never intended to love her. "You know what's fascinating," Sadie said quietly. Eleanor frowned. "What I used to think you hated me because I wasn't enough for your son." Rain hit the windows harder outside. Sadie's eyes slowly lifted. "But now I realize you hated me because I made excuses for him." Eleanor's expression darkened instantly. "Excuse me, Lloyd," became selfish because everyone around him rewarded selfishness. The temperature in the room shifted immediately. Dangerous now. "You defended him no matter what he did," Sadie continued softly. "Even when he became cruel." Eleanor stood abruptly. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "No," Sadie replied calmly. "I finally do." Silence. Heavy. Then Eleanor played her next card. "Manipulation. You're destroying him." Sadie almost felt sorry for how predictable that was. "No," she said quietly. "I stopped protecting him." Eleanor's eyes flashed. Same thing. That sentence explained everything. Years of enabling. Years of entitlement. Years teaching Lloyd that consequences were optional as long as power remained intact. Sadie slowly stood too now. For the first time in her life, she realized Eleanor Cunningham was not intimidating, just emotionally hollow. "You know what Lloyd feared most?" Sadie asked softly. Eleanor scoffed. "My son fears nothing." Sadie smiled faintly. "That's because women like me kept absorbing the damage for men like him." Eleanor grabbed her purse angrily. "You're being dramatic." "No," Sadie replied. "I'm being honest." The older woman stared at her like she was seeing a stranger. And maybe she was. Because the old Sadie would have apologized by now. Would have cried. Would have begged to keep peace. This version no longer cared about being liked by people committed to misunderstanding her. Eleanor lowered her voice suddenly. "Do you think this makes you powerful?" Sadie considered the question carefully, then answered honestly. No. Then why are you doing this? That answer came easier than expected. Because I finally realized my pain was never your family's inconvenience to manage. Eleanor looked genuinely unsettled by that. Good. Sadie walked slowly toward the fireplace. You all benefited from my silence, she continued quietly. Lloyd especially. Memories flooded her mind. Defending him publicly, protecting his image privately, explaining away emotional neglect, swallowing humiliation to preserve appearances. God, how many women disappeared inside marriages like that? You know the saddest part? Sadie asked softly. Eleanor said nothing. I really loved him. And she had. Completely. Dangerously. The kind of love that made women abandon themselves slowly while calling it devotion. Eleanor's expression softened slightly for the first time. But not enough. Never enough. Lloyd is falling apart, she admitted quietly. Sadie felt something twist painfully in her chest. Because despite everything, some part of her still hated hearing that. Eleanor noticed immediately. He needs you. There it was. The final manipulation. Not because Lloyd loved her, because Lloyd was collapsing without the emotional structure Sadie spent years providing. Sadie looked directly at Eleanor and finally understood the role they assigned her all along. Not wife, not partner, emotional caretaker, human damage control, no more. Sadie stepped closer slowly. Then maybe she said softly, he should have thought about that before destroying the one person who spent years protecting him from himself. Eleanor's face hardened again. You're cold now. Sadie smiled sadly. No. I'm just finally setting boundaries with people who only valued me when I was suffering quietly. That one landed. Hard. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then, Eleanor whispered bitterly, You've changed? Sadie nodded once. Yes. Rain thundered outside the mansion, while the years of emotional illusion finally died between them. Then, Sadie delivered the sentence Eleanor Cunningham would remember for the rest of her life. Soft women become dangerous, she said quietly, when they realize kindness was never protecting them. Eleanor stared at her speechlessly. And for the first time, since joining the Cunningham family, Sadie no longer felt small standing in front of her. The first time Lloyd Cunningham cried in front of Sadie, it was 2 weeks after everything collapsed. By then, the damage had spread everywhere. The merger was officially dead. Financial blogs were dissecting Cunningham Global daily. Investors had begun quietly withdrawing support. And worst of all for Lloyd, people were talking. In Manhattan, elite circles' reputation mattered almost more than money. And suddenly, Lloyd's name no longer inspired admiration. It inspired whispers. Did you hear about the fraud investigation? He cheated on his wife, right? I heard the company was actually built with her money. Apparently, she's the smart one. That last rumor hurt Lloyd most, because deep down, he knew it was true. It was nearly midnight when Sadie heard pounding on the front door. Not knocking, pounding. Maria had already gone home, and the mansion felt enormous in the silence. Sadie looked up from the book in her lap slowly. She already knew who it was. The security cameras confirmed it seconds later. Lloyd. Rain soaked through his dark coat while he stood outside looking nothing like the polished executive from magazine covers. He looked exhausted, human, broken. Sadie stared at the screen for several long moments before finally unlocking the door remotely. Lloyd entered the house quickly. The moment he stepped inside, she smelled whiskey. Not overwhelming, but enough. Enough to tell her he was unraveling. For a second, neither of them spoke. Rainwater dripped from his coat onto the marble floor, while Sadie remained seated in the living room beneath soft lamplight.
The emotional distance between them felt endless now. Lloyd swallowed hard. You changed the flowers. Sadie glanced toward the white orchids near the fireplace. Yes. A meaningless observation. But heartbreak made people reach for meaningless things when the real conversation terrified them. Lloyd removed his coat slowly. I went to Celeste's apartment tonight. Sadie's expression didn't change. Interesting. Once that sentence would have shattered her. Now nothing. Lloyd laughed bitterly at her silence. She wouldn't let me in. Sadie closed her book carefully. What did you expect? His jaw tightened. She's trying to protect herself. Of course she was. People like Celeste loved power, not loyalty. And Lloyd no longer looked powerful. He looked dangerous to stand beside. Sadie studied him quietly. His eyes were bloodshot, his tie crooked, his confidence fractured. This wasn't the man who smirked while serving her divorce papers. This was a man realizing consequences had finally arrived. I lost Keller today, Lloyd whispered suddenly. Martin Keller, the senior investor, one of the most important connections in Lloyd's career. Sadie said nothing. He pulled out completely. Lloyd laughed again, emptier this time. 12 years building everything, and it's disappearing in weeks. Sadie felt a painful ache move through her chest. Not because she wanted him back, but because grief didn't vanish instantly, just because betrayal existed. She once loved this man enough to build her entire life around him. Watching him collapse still hurt somewhere deep inside her. And Lloyd noticed. Of course he did. He stepped closer carefully. You still care. Sadie immediately hated herself for letting that emotion show. Because there it was again. Lloyd, searching for comfort inside the ruins he created. You're hurting, she said quietly. Yes. And somehow you still think that's my responsibility to fix. That landed. Lloyd looked away first. The silence stretched painfully between them. Then suddenly he said the one thing Sadie never expected. I'm scared. Her chest tightened. Not because she pitied him, because it was honest. Maybe the first truly honest thing Lloyd had said in years. I could lose everything, he whispered. Sadie stared at him carefully. Everything. Funny word. Because Lloyd still thought everything meant money, reputation, and status. Not marriage, not trust, not love. You already lost everything, Sadie said softly. His eyes met hers instantly. And for the first time, he looked devastated by her emotionally, not legally. Lloyd sat down heavily across from her. I made mistakes. There it was. Still minimizing, still reducing betrayal to mistakes. Sadie looked at him calmly. You cheated on me publicly. He closed his eyes. You forged my signature. Silence. You planned to blame financial crimes on me. I panicked. You humiliated me in front of other people. His breathing sharpened. Sadie. And the entire time she whispered, voice finally cracking slightly. I kept loving you. That one destroyed him. Because no matter how selfish Lloyd became, some part of him always assumed Sadie's love would survive anything. Now he was realizing love could die too. Slowly. Painfully. Permanently. I never wanted to hurt you like this, he whispered. Sadie almost laughed at that. No man ever says he meant to destroy the woman he destroys. Lloyd looked physically sick. I know you hate me. The strange part, she didn't. Not anymore. Hatred required emotional attachment. And Sadie was beginning to emotionally leave him behind. I don't hate you, she admitted quietly. That seemed to hurt him even more. Because hatred still contained passion. Indifference was colder. Lloyd rubbed both hands over his face. I keep thinking about the beginning, he whispered.
So did she. The tiny apartment. Cheap wine. Dreams. Love before ego poisoned it. I used to be different, he said. Sadie looked at him carefully. No, she replied softly. You used to be less rewarded for being selfish. That sentence sat heavily in the room. Because it was true. Success amplified who Lloyd already was underneath. And people like Eleanor spent years teaching him that ambition mattered more than empathy. Lloyd's voice broke slightly. I don't know how everything got this bad. Sadie stared at him in disbelief. You really don't know? He looked up slowly. And suddenly, years of buried pain rose inside her all at once. The loneliness, Lloyd. Her voice trembled now. The constant humiliation. Feeling invisible in my own marriage. Watching you protect everyone except me. He looked shattered, listening to her. Good. He should. You made me feel grateful for crumbs, she whispered. Do you understand how cruel that is? Tears finally filled his eyes. Real tears. Not manipulation, not performance. Too late, honesty. And somehow, that made it worse. Because Sadie realized this man might genuinely regret losing her now. Not because he suddenly became good. Because consequences forced self-awareness onto him. Lloyd leaned forward desperately. I can fix this. There it was. The arrogance again. Still believing everything could be negotiated back into place. Sadie slowly stood. No, she said gently. Panic flashed across his face immediately. Sadie, please. She walked toward the hallway closet calmly, then returned holding a packed black suitcase. Lloyd stared at it in stunned silence. Sadie placed it beside him quietly. You don't live here anymore. The sentence echoed through the massive living room. Final. Lloyd looked completely destroyed now. This was my home. Sadie's eyes met his steadily. No, she whispered. It was mine. You just stopped appreciating it. For several seconds, he couldn't move. Then finally he stood shakily and grabbed the suitcase. Rain hammered against the windows outside, while the man Sadie once would have died for stood in front of her, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. I did love you, he whispered. Sadie's chest tightened painfully. I know. That was the tragedy. The love had been real once, but real love still died when buried beneath ego, betrayal, and cruelty long enough. Lloyd stared at her one last time. Then he walked toward the front door carrying the suitcase himself. No assistants, no lawyers, no image, just consequences. And when the door finally closed behind him, Sadie stood alone in the silent mansion and cried for the first time since discovering the affair. Not because she wanted him back, but because mourning who someone used to be could hurt just as much as losing them. The deposition took place inside a cold conference room in downtown Manhattan. No chandeliers, no luxury, no performance, just truth sitting under fluorescent lights where nobody could hide behind charm for very long. Sadie arrived wearing a charcoal suit and low heels, her hair pulled back neatly. Controlled, composed, untouchable. Rebecca walked beside her, carrying 3 thick binders filled with evidence. You okay? Rebecca asked quietly before entering. Sadie looked through the glass wall into the conference room. Lloyd already sat at the far end beside his attorneys. He looked older, not physically, spiritually, like consequences had aged him faster than time. I don't know, Sadie admitted honestly. Rebecca nodded once. That means you're still human. Inside the room, conversation stopped the moment Sadie entered. Lloyd looked up immediately. And for one painful second, she saw it again. Or whatever broken version of love remained after betrayal destroyed everything around it. Then his attorney stood. Mrs. Cunningham. Professional. Careful. Nervous. Good. Everyone in this room was nervous now. Because financial fraud investigations made powerful people deeply uncomfortable. Sadie sat across from Lloyd without speaking. The silence between them felt heavier than shouting ever could. Lloyd tried first. "You look tired." Sadie almost smiled at the absurdity. After everything, that was his opening sentence. "So do you?" she replied calmly. Rebecca opened the first binder immediately. "Let's begin." For the next hour, attorneys reviewed financial records, transfer authorizations, and corporate communications connected to Cunningham Global. At first, Lloyd remained composed. Corporate Lloyd. Measured answers. Strategic wording. Careful distancing. "I don't recall. That wasn't my understanding. I relied on internal recommendations." Sadie recognized the version of him sitting there. The executive. The negotiator. The man who spent years talking his way out of accountability. But Rebecca Mercer was not easily manipulated. She slid another document across the table calmly. "Can you identify the signature at the bottom of page 3? Lloyd's jaw tightened immediately. "My wife's." Rebecca tilted her head slightly. "Incorrect." Silence. She continued softly. "It's a forgery." The room shifted again. Lloyd's attorney leaned forward quickly. "Objection to characterization." Rebecca smiled coldly. "We have handwriting experts prepared to testify otherwise." Sadie watched Lloyd carefully, noticed the tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion beneath his eyes. He wasn't sleeping. Good. For years, Sadie lost sleep while protecting his comfort. Now it was his turn to sit awake with consequences. Rebecca turned another page. "Mr. Cunningham, were you aware these authorizations redirected liability toward Mrs. Cunningham personally?" Lloyd rubbed his forehead. That wasn't the intention, not denial. Sadie noticed that immediately. Rebecca noticed too. "So you admit awareness? I admit paperwork became complicated during merger restructuring." God. Even now he couldn't say the truth plainly. "You betrayed your wife. You forged documents. You tried protecting yourself at her expense. But men like Lloyd always preferred language that softened cruelty." Rebecca's voice sharpened. "Did your wife authorize these transactions?" Silence. Long, heavy, finally, "No." The word landed like a crack through glass, because it was the first real admission. Sadie felt her chest tighten painfully. Not with satisfaction, grief. Because hearing the truth publicly made everything irreversible somehow. Lloyd finally looked at her directly. "I panicked." Sadie stared at him. "You planned." His eyes closed briefly. And suddenly, the room felt less like legal proceedings and more like an autopsy of a marriage. Rebecca continued methodically. "Let's discuss your extramarital relationship with Celeste Harper." Lloyd's attorney objected immediately. Rebecca slid printed emails onto the table. Relationship overlap impacted merger negotiations and financial decision-making. Objection withdrawn. Interesting how fast morality disappeared when evidence appeared. Lloyd looked physically ill now. Several emails were projected onto the conference screen, private hotel reservations, business expenses connected to personal trips, messages mocking Sadie. One line in particular made the room go still. "She'll never fight me anyway." Sadie felt something inside her chest quietly break, hearing it aloud. Not because she didn't know, because Lloyd truly believed it. All those years, loving him faithfully. And he saw her softness as guaranteed obedience. Rebecca's expression hardened. "You believed your wife was too emotionally dependent to defend herself."
Lloyd looked ashamed for the first time. Real shame. Not embarrassment, not image panic. Shame. "I was wrong," he whispered. Rebecca leaned back slightly. "Yes," she said. "You were?" The silence afterward stretched painfully. Then Lloyd made the mistake that finally destroyed whatever sympathy remained in the room. "She benefited from my success too."
Rebecca's eyebrows lifted slowly. Oh no. Sadie almost pitied him. Almost. Because Lloyd still didn't understand the emotional atmosphere had completely shifted. Nobody saw him as powerful anymore. Just desperate. Rebecca calmly opened another folder. "Actually," she said, "let's discuss who benefited from whom." She handed copies to every attorney present. Early company launch records, original investment transfers, strategic planning notes, investor preparation materials. Lloyd's expression changed instantly. Fear. Pure fear. Sadie watched him recognize her handwriting on old business strategy drafts, meeting prep notes, networking outlines, the invisible labor of a woman history almost erased. Rebecca spoke carefully now. Mrs. Cunningham financially funded the company's earliest operations. Another page. She also developed early investor communication structures. Another page. And according to internal correspondence, Rebecca paused slightly. Mr. Cunningham privately referred to his wife as the only reason investors trust me. Dead silence. Lloyd looked shattered, because suddenly the room saw it. Not the polished executive image. The truth underneath it. A woman quietly helping build a man who later humiliated her publicly. One attorney removed his glasses slowly. Jesus Christ. Sadie felt exposed in a completely different way now. Not humiliated. Seen. For years, her contributions existed invisibly behind Lloyd's success. Now they finally had witnesses. Lloyd looked at her desperately. "You knew I appreciated you." Sadie laughed softly. The sound hurt even her. "Appreciation isn't love, Lloyd." He looked devastated hearing that. And for the first time, Sadie realized something important. Lloyd truly believed providing luxury excused emotional neglect. Like wealth compensated for loneliness. Like houses and jewelry replaced tenderness. He genuinely never understood the damage he caused until consequences arrived. Rebecca closed the final binder. One last question. Lloyd looked exhausted. "Did you love your wife while engaging in this conduct?" The room became perfectly still. Even the attorneys stopped writing, because suddenly this wasn't about fraud anymore. It was about character. Lloyd looked at Sadie for a very long time before answering. Yes. Her chest tightened painfully again. Rebecca's expression didn't change. "Then why did you treat her like collateral damage?" That question destroyed him. Because there was no corporate language for it. No strategic wording, no polished escape route. Just truth. Lloyd's eyes filled slowly. "I don't know." And somehow, that honest answer hurt Sadie more than all the lies. Because she believed him. He genuinely didn't know when ambition became cruelty, when ego became emotional violence, when success became permission to devalue the woman who loved him most. The deposition ended shortly afterward. Chairs moved, papers gathered, attorneys whispering quietly. But Lloyd remained seated while everyone else stood. Broken. Rebecca touched Sadie's arm gently. "You did well." Sadie nodded faintly. But emotionally, she felt hollow. Not victorious, just tired. As she turned toward the exit, Lloyd suddenly spoke again. "Sadie." She stopped, slowly looked back. His eyes were red now, raw, human. and finally stripped of every performance. "Who are you?" he whispered. The question hung painfully between them. Sadie stared at him quietly, then answered with heartbreaking calm. "I'm the woman you underestimated. And this time," Lloyd finally understood exactly what that had cost him. Celeste Harper disappeared for 6 days after the deposition. No social events, no public appearances, no photographs. And in Manhattan, elite circles, disappearance was louder than scandal. Sadie first saw the headlines while sitting in a quiet cafe with Ava on a gray Thursday morning. Former consultant linked to Cunningham financial investigation, inside the affair that shook Cunningham Global. Sources claim Celeste Harper cooperating with legal teams. Ava nearly dropped her coffee, laughing bitterly. "Oh, now she's cooperating." Sadie stared calmly at the article on her tablet. Celeste looked beautiful even in scandal photographs. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect performance. But Sadie could finally see the panic underneath the image. "You okay?" Ava asked carefully. Sadie looked up. "Honestly," Ava nodded. "I thought revenge would feel bigger." Ava frowned slightly. "What does it feel like?" Sadie considered the question. "Quiet." That surprised even her. Because for months, she imagined this moment differently. She imagined satisfaction, vindication, triumph. Instead, she mostly felt tired. Like surviving betrayal required so much emotional energy, there was very little left afterward. Ava reached across the table gently. "That's because healing isn't dramatic," she said softly. "It's just finally putting the weight down." Sadie looked away quickly before emotion could rise too visibly. Meanwhile, across the city, Lloyd Cunningham was falling apart publicly. The investigation widened daily. Executives began distancing themselves. Old allies stopped returning calls. And perhaps most humiliating of all, Celeste started saving herself. 3 days later, Sadie attended a private fundraising luncheon for women in business at the Lexington Hotel. She almost cancelled twice. But Rebecca insisted. "You need to be seen outside the scandal," she said firmly. "Not as Lloyd Cunningham's wife. As Sadie Cunningham." That sentence still felt unfamiliar somehow, as if Sadie were learning herself from the beginning again. The luncheon ballroom buzzed softly with conversation and clinking glasses when Sadie arrived, and immediately, people noticed her. Not with pity anymore, with curiosity, respect. Some women even looked inspired. That emotional shift unsettled Sadie more than hostility ever had. For years, she felt invisible inside these rooms. Now people watched her like a woman who survived something brutal without collapsing publicly. A woman approached her carefully, near the champagne table. "Mrs. Cunningham." Sadie turned politely. The woman smiled nervously. "I just wanted to say, the way you handled everything was incredibly dignified." Sadie blinked slightly. "Thank you." The woman lowered her voice. "My husband cheated on me 5 years ago." Pain flashed briefly across her face. "I wish I'd had your strength." Sadie's chest tightened unexpectedly, because people kept calling her strong. But nobody saw the nights she cried alone in dark rooms, wondering why love made her feel so worthless. Nobody saw how badly she once wanted Lloyd to choose her willingly. Strength looked beautiful from a distance. Up close, it often looked like survival. Across the ballroom, another woman approached. Then another, quiet conversations. Private confessions. Stories of humiliation hidden beneath luxury lifestyles. And suddenly, Sadie understood something heartbreaking. There were so many women silently disappearing inside marriage while pretending everything was fine. By the end of the luncheon, Sadie felt emotionally exhausted. Not from attention, from recognition. For the first time in years, people saw her as more than decorative.
That realization felt strangely painful. As she exited the ballroom, a familiar voice stopped her cold. Sadie. Celeste, of course. She stood near the elevators wearing oversized sunglasses and cream wool despite being indoors, trying to hide, trying to remain elegant, trying to pretend she still had control. But the cracks showed now. The tension around her mouth, the exhaustion beneath expensive makeup. Fear. Sadie studied her quietly. This woman once looked invincible. Now she just looked lonely. "I didn't expect to see you here," Sadie said calmly. Celeste gave a humorless laugh. "I'm sure." An awkward silence settled between them. Then finally, Celeste removed her sunglasses slowly. Her eyes were tired, bloodshot, human. Interesting. Sadie had spent so long viewing her as a villain, she almost forgot villains were people too. Broken people. Selfish people. But people. "You won," Celeste said quietly. Sadie frowned slightly. This was never a competition. Celeste laughed bitterly. "That's easy to say now." "No," Sadie replied softly. "It's true." For a moment, something almost ashamed crossed Celeste's face, then disappeared. "I didn't think he loved you," she admitted quietly. That sentence stunned Sadie more than expected. But Celeste crossed her arms tightly. "He talked about you like..." She hesitated. "Like you were just part of his life. Comfortable. Predictable." Sadie felt grief rise unexpectedly in her throat. Because maybe Lloyd truly had reduced her into emotional furniture over time. Useful, reliable, forgettable. Celeste looked away. "I thought I was special." Sadie stared at her for several long seconds, then finally asked, "Did you love him?" Celeste actually smiled sadly. "No." The honesty shocked her. "I liked what he represented," Celeste admitted. Power, stability, access. There it was. Not passion, not connection, ambition. Celeste leaned against the wall tiredly. "You know the funny part?" Sadie said nothing. "He talked about loyalty constantly while betraying everyone around him. That hurt because it was true. Lloyd demanded emotional loyalty he no longer practiced himself." Celeste looked down briefly. "He's destroyed." Sadie's expression remained unreadable. "He keeps calling me." And I blocked him. Of course she did. Because once Lloyd stopped looking powerful, people stopped sacrificing themselves for him. The realization was cruel, but honest. Celeste suddenly looked directly at Sadie. "I know you hate me." Sadie considered the sentence carefully, then answered truthfully, "I did." Celeste nodded faintly like she deserved that, but not anymore. That seemed to genuinely surprise her. Sadie adjusted the sleeve of her coat slowly. "Hating you keeps me emotionally trapped in this story," she said quietly. "I'm trying to leave it." Silence. Heavy. Then Celeste whispered, "I'm sorry." Sadie looked at her carefully. And strangely, she believed her. Not because Celeste became good overnight, but because consequences stripped performance away from everyone eventually. Celeste swallowed hard. "You know what scares me most?" Sadie waited. "You stayed kind longer than either of us deserved." That sentence followed Sadie all the way home. Because maybe that was the real tragedy. Not that she loved deeply. That she kept offering tenderness to people committed to exploiting it. That evening, Sadie sat alone on the back terrace, watching ocean-gray clouds move across the sky. For the first time in months, she felt still. No rage, no obsession, just sadness, slowly loosening its grip.
Her phone buzzed quietly beside her. A text from Lloyd. "I miss talking to you." Sadie stared at the screen for a very long time, then locked the phone without answering. Because finally, she was beginning to understand something powerful. Missing someone wasn't the same as belonging with them, and loneliness was no longer enough reason to return to emotional destruction. The first thing Sadie changed was the color of the walls. Not because she hated the old ones, because Lloyd had chosen them. Every shade inside the mansion suddenly carried memories of compromise. Muted gray because Lloyd thought white looked too feminine. Dark wood because Lloyd preferred strong masculine textures. Abstract metal sculptures because Lloyd once said softness made spaces feel weak. Sadie stood in the center of the living room one morning while contractors moved furniture around her. Sunlight poured through the massive windows. For the first time in years, the house finally felt quiet. Not tense, not performative, just quiet. "What are we thinking?" the interior designer asked carefully. Sadie looked around slowly, then smiled faintly. "Light," she said. The woman blinked. "What kind?" "Honest light." The designer laughed softly. But Sadie meant it. She was tired of living inside emotional shadows. By afternoon, paint samples covered half the walls while Ava walked barefoot through the chaos carrying iced coffee. "I cannot believe you're finally getting rid of the sad billionaire funeral aesthetic." Sadie laughed quietly. That bad Ava looked around dramatically. This house looked like a rich man's depression. For the first time in months, the laughter came easily. Not forced, not careful, real. And, somehow, that scared Sadie more than pain ever did. Because happiness meant movement. Forward movement. Healing. Which also meant accepting the marriage was truly over. Ava sat beside her on the floor among paint catalogs. "You know what's weird?" she asked. "What you seem more like yourself now than when you were married." The sentence stayed with Sadie long after Ava left. More like yourself now. How tragic was that? To lose a marriage and accidentally find yourself underneath the wreckage. 3 weeks later, Sadie attended her first architecture meeting in over a decade. The conference room overlooked the Hudson River, while designers presented luxury redevelopment proposals for a boutique hotel project in Tribeca. Sadie sat quietly at the end of the table listening. At first, nobody recognized her. Not Lloyd Cunningham's wife, not scandal headlines, just another architect reviewing structural concepts. And strangely, that felt freeing. A young designer finished his presentation nervously. Everyone nodded politely. Then Sadie spoke for the first time. "The emotional flow is wrong." The room stilled. The designer blinked. But Sadie stood slowly and walked toward the blueprint display. "You designed this like a luxury property," she explained calmly. "But people don't pay premium prices for marble anymore." She pointed toward the central atrium. "They pay for emotional experience." The room became completely silent now. Sadie continued naturally. The entire structure should feel intimate instead of impressive. Warm lighting, organic textures, open social pathways. One executive slowly leaned forward. "That's actually brilliant." Sadie froze slightly, because she forgot what it felt like to be listened to professionally, to speak and not immediately be dismissed. By the end of the meeting, 3 executives were asking for her opinion directly, and one older investor stopped her privately near the elevators. "You're Sadie Cunningham, right?" There it was. Recognition. Sadie smiled carefully. "Yes." The man extended his hand. "I'm Daniel Mercer. We met years ago at one of Lloyd's early investor dinners." Sadie vaguely remembered him. Back when she still coached Lloyd through networking events before pretending not to notice her own contributions disappearing publicly. Daniel smiled warmly. You were always the smartest person in those rooms. Sadie stared at him in genuine surprise. What? He chuckled softly. Lloyd talked. You observed. Big difference. Emotion caught unexpectedly in her throat, because nobody had ever said that aloud before. Daniel handed her a business card. If you ever decide to return to development consulting, call me. After he walked away, Sadie stood motionless beside the elevator for several seconds. All those years. She really had disappeared inside Lloyd's shadow. Not because she lacked intelligence, because she kept shrinking herself to preserve his comfort. That realization made grief and empowerment collide painfully inside her chest. That night, Sadie sat alone in her redesigned living room, surrounded by warm cream colors and soft lighting. The mansion finally looked alive again. Not cold, not intimidating, human. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca. You sitting down? Rebecca asked immediately after Sadie answered. Should I be worried? Actually, no. Sadie smiled slightly. That's new. Rebecca laughed. An investor group wants to meet you. Sadie frowned. What kind of meeting? A leadership discussion. Silence. Sadie actually thought she misheard. Leadership. Apparently several investors were extremely impressed with your boardroom presentation. Sadie leaned back slowly. That wasn't a presentation. Exactly, Rebecca replied. That's why they trusted it. The words settled deeply. People trusted authenticity when they encountered it rarely enough. I don't know if I can do that again, Sadie admitted quietly. You already did. After the call ended, Sadie sat silently for a long time, then finally walked toward the hallway mirror. For years, she only saw herself through Lloyd's eyes. Supportive wife, elegant hostess, emotional caretaker, background character. Now she saw something different. A woman returning to herself piece by piece. Her phone buzzed again, this time from Lloyd. Can we talk? Sadie stared at the message. Then another appeared. Please? She closed her eyes briefly. A few months ago, that single word would have controlled her emotionally for days. Now it mostly made her tired. Still, some part of her needed closure too. They met 2 nights later at a quiet waterfront restaurant in Connecticut. Lloyd stood when she arrived, and for a second, Sadie barely recognized him. Weight loss, dark circles, no arrogance left, just exhaustion. You look good, he said quietly. Sadie sat across from him calmly. So do you. The lie almost hurt to say. Lloyd looked out toward the water briefly. I heard about the investor meeting. Of course he had. The business world loved irony, especially ironic downfalls. How people talk. Sadie nodded faintly. They always did. That landed. Lloyd looked down. I should have listened to you more. Sadie almost laughed sadly. More. He barely listened at all near the end. I spent years trying to make myself smaller so you could feel bigger, she said quietly. Lloyd's expression tightened painfully. I know. No, Sadie corrected softly. You know now. Silence. Then Lloyd whispered something that genuinely broke her heart a little. I don't think I ever really saw you clearly until I lost you. Sadie looked at him for a very long time. And maybe that was the cruelest truth of all. Some people only recognize love after they destroy the person giving it. Lloyd looked up finally. Was I ever enough for you? The vulnerability in his voice sounded almost childlike. Sadie's chest ached unexpectedly. Because despite everything, she once would have answered yes without hesitation. Now, she finally understood the real answer. "You could have been," she said softly. "And you chose not to be." Lloyd looked completely shattered by that. And for the first time since the marriage ended, Sadie walked away from him, not feeling broken, just free. The divorce hearing took place on a quiet Monday morning in late October. Outside the courthouse, Manhattan moved normally. Taxis honked, people rushed to work, coffee carts steamed in the cold air. The world continued turning, like marriages didn't collapse inside buildings every day. Sadie stood near the courthouse steps, wearing a black wool coat, while wind lifted strands of hair around her face. Rebecca approached beside her, holding final settlement documents. "You ready?" she asked softly. Sadie looked up at the gray sky. "No," she admitted. Rebecca smiled faintly. "That means you actually loved him." The words hurt because they were true. This wasn't just the ending of betrayal. It was the funeral of the future Sadie once imagined for herself. Children. Growing old together. Sunday mornings. Tiny, ordinary moments that never looked dramatic enough while they still existed. Inside the courtroom, everything felt painfully formal. Clean. Emotionless. As if 12 years of love could be reduced into signatures and legal language. Lloyd was already seated when Sadie entered, and for a second, her chest tightened painfully, because he looked tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. The investigation had stripped almost everything from him. His merger collapsed permanently. Several board members resigned. Financial penalties were still pending. And socially, he had become radioactive. People who once begged for invitations to his parties now pretended not to know him. Even Eleanor stopped appearing publicly beside him. Success created loyal audiences. Failure revealed how temporary most people were. Lloyd stood automatically when Sadie approached. Old habit, respect arriving too late. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Sadie sat down calmly. "So do you?" Again a lie. But this time, Lloyd smiled faintly, like he knew it too. The judge entered shortly afterward, and the proceedings began. Asset division, legal acknowledgements, property protections, cold words describing deeply personal destruction. Rebecca handled most communication, while Sadie remained quiet. Across the room, Lloyd barely argued anymore. That surprised everyone. Months ago, he would have fought viciously for image, money, and control. Now, he looked emotionally exhausted by the war itself. At one point, the judge reviewed the estate ownership filings and glanced toward Lloyd. "So the marital residence remains solely under Mrs. Cunningham's ownership?" Lloyd nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." No protest, no ego, just acceptance. Sadie felt strangely sad hearing it. Not because she wanted him to fight, because once upon a time, Lloyd would have never surrendered anything willingly. Now he seemed too broken to keep pretending strength. Later, during a short recess, Sadie stood alone near the courthouse windows overlooking the city. The silence around her felt surreal. Then Lloyd approached carefully. "Can we talk for a minute?" Sadie hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into an empty side hallway, away from attorneys and reporters. For several seconds, neither spoke. Two people standing inside the ruins of a shared life. Finally, Lloyd exhaled shakily. "I keep thinking about the beginning." Sadie looked away. "Dangerous topic." "The apartment?" she asked softly. He nodded. The terrible heating system. Despite herself, Sadie smiled faintly. "And the leak above the stove?" Lloyd laughed quietly. "Used pots to catch rainwater. You said it made us look artistic. Silence settled again afterward, but softer this time. Not romantic, just grieving. Lloyd leaned against the wall tiredly. I was happy then. Sadie's chest tightened painfully. So was I. And maybe that was the tragedy neither of them could fully escape. The love had once been real, not imagined, not fake. Real things still broke sometimes. Lloyd rubbed a hand over his face. I don't know when I became this person. Sadie studied him quietly. You didn't become him overnight. He looked down. No. You just kept choosing ambition over empathy until eventually there wasn't enough empathy left. The honesty hurt both of them. Lloyd swallowed hard. I thought success would fix everything. That's because nobody ever taught you emotional intimacy mattered too. That sentence hit deeper than she intended, because suddenly Sadie saw it clearly. Eleanor. The pressure. The constant obsession with status. Lloyd spent his entire life learning achievement created value. Not tenderness, not vulnerability. Achievement. And somewhere along the way, he started treating people like extensions of success instead of human beings. I hurt you, he whispered. The simplicity of the sentence almost shattered her. No excuses, no manipulation, just truth. Yes, Sadie replied softly. Lloyd's eyes filled slowly. I think about that every day now. Sadie believed him. And strangely, that no longer brought satisfaction, only sadness. Because consequences had finally forced Lloyd to become emotionally honest. But honesty, arriving after destruction, still left destruction behind. He looked at her desperately. If I had listened sooner, Sadie interrupted gently. But you didn't. The hallway fell silent again. Then Lloyd asked the question that had clearly haunted him for months. Do you think we could have survived this if I stopped earlier? Sadie closed her eyes briefly. A version of this story existed somewhere. One where Lloyd confessed early. One where therapy happened. One where respect returned before resentment poisoned everything completely. But that wasn't their story. You didn't stop, she whispered. And that was the answer. Lloyd looked devastated again. Not dramatic devastation. Quiet devastation. The kind that settled permanently into someone's bones. I'm sorry, he said finally. Not polished. Not strategic. Human. Sadie felt tears burn unexpectedly behind her eyes. Because for years she begged emotionally for accountability. And now that it finally arrived, there was nothing left inside her needing it anymore. That apology would have saved me once, she admitted quietly. Lloyd flinched visibly. But now Sadie looked directly into his eyes. Now it just helps me let go peacefully. That one destroyed him completely. Because Lloyd finally understood the real loss wasn't the marriage papers. It was the emotional version of Sadie who would have forgiven him if he had loved her better sooner. And she no longer existed. Back inside the courtroom, final signatures waited. Rebecca handed Sadie the pen first. Simple moment. Heavy meaning. Sadie stared down at the documents. 12 years. Reduced to ink. Her hand trembled slightly before signing. Sadie Cunningham. The same name. Different woman. When Lloyd signed afterward, his hand visibly shook. The judge finalized the dissolution quietly. Just like that. Legally over. No dramatic music. No cinematic explosion. Just silence. The kind that follows after emotional storms finally pass. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited across the street, hoping for scandal photographs. But Sadie ignored them completely. Rebecca hugged her tightly near the car. You okay? Sadie looked toward the cloudy Manhattan skyline. And strangely, she was. Not happy, Not healed completely, but lighter. As Lloyd stepped outside moments later, their eyes met one final time across the courthouse steps. No screaming, no hatred, just grief and understanding. Lloyd walked toward her slowly. "I did love you," he whispered one last time. Sadie felt tears finally slip down her face. "I know." And that was what made everything hurt so much. Because love, without respect, still destroyed people. Lloyd looked at her like he wanted to say more. But some endings didn't need more words. So instead, Sadie stepped back gently. Not angrily, not cruelly, just finally choosing herself. And for the first time in years, she walked away without feeling guilty for it. 6 months later, the Cunningham estate no longer looked like Lloyd's house. It finally looked like Sadie's home. The heavy grey walls were gone now, replaced with warm ivory tones that caught sunlight softly every morning. Fresh flowers sat near open windows. Music played again sometimes, not for guests, for her. The silence inside the mansion had changed too. It no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Sadie stood barefoot in the kitchen early one Saturday morning, making coffee while ocean light spilled across the marble counters. For years, she rushed through mornings trying to become whatever version of herself everyone else needed. Now, she moved slowly. Like someone finally learning life didn't need to feel like emotional survival all the time. Her phone buzzed softly. "Ava, brunch in an hour. Don't cancel like an emotionally reclusive billionaire widow." Sadie laughed out loud. Real laughter. The kind that used to feel impossible. She typed back, "I'm coming. Relax." Then she paused briefly before adding, "And I'm not emotionally reclusive anymore." Ava's reply came instantly. "Oh my God. Growth." Sadie smiled as she set the phone down. Growth. Funny word. Healing never arrived dramatically the way movies promised. It happened quietly, in ordinary moments. The first morning you stopped checking someone's messages mentally. The first dinner where you laughed without guilt. The first night you slept peacefully without replaying betrayal inside your head. Healing was boring sometimes, and beautiful because of it. Later that afternoon, Sadie walked through the nearly completed Tribeca hotel project alongside investors and designers discussing final revisions. People listened when she spoke now. Not politely, seriously. The difference still startled her occasionally. One young architect handed her updated sketches nervously. "I adjusted the social flow like you suggested." Sadie reviewed the drawings carefully, then smiled warmly. "This is much better." The woman visibly relaxed. And suddenly, Sadie saw herself years ago. Talented, hopeful, still believing her voice mattered. She refused to become the kind of successful person who made others feel invisible. Maybe that was part of healing too, not passing pain forward. Daniel Mercer approached beside her during the tour. "You've completely transformed this project." Sadie shook her head lightly. "No, the team did." Daniel smiled knowingly, still uncomfortable taking credit. That one landed softly. Because yes, she still was. Years of shrinking yourself inside a marriage didn't disappear overnight. But she was learning, slowly, patiently. "You know," Daniel said carefully, "people trust you because you lead without needing to dominate the room." Sadie looked toward the workers moving through the building. Lloyd always dominated rooms, controlled them, owned them. But fear-based leadership eventually collapsed the moment fear disappeared. Maybe gentleness wasn't weakness after all. Maybe it was just a different kind of strength. That evening, Sadie hosted a small dinner party at the estate. Nothing extravagant, Just Ava, Rebecca, Daniel, and a few close friends. No performance. No strategic networking. No pretending. The dining room glowed beneath soft candlelight, while laughter filled the house naturally for the first time in years. At one point, Ava looked around dramatically. This place finally feels alive. Sadie glanced around quietly. She was right. For so long, the mansion felt like a museum dedicated to appearances. Now it finally felt human. Rebecca raised her wine glass suddenly. To Sadie. Everyone smiled. Sadie laughed softly. Oh no. Yes, Rebecca insisted. To the woman who survived betrayal without losing herself completely. Sadie looked down briefly, emotion catching unexpectedly in her throat. Because there was a time she almost had lost herself completely, trying harder, forgiving longer, loving people who only valued her sacrifice. Ava lifted her glass too, to soft women who learned boundaries. Everyone clinked glasses gently. And for the first time in years, Sadie didn't feel lonely sitting at her own table. Much later, after everyone left, Sadie walked alone down toward the beach behind the estate. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath moonlight while cold wind moved softly through her hair. This had become her favorite place recently. Not because it erased pain, because it reminded her life kept moving no matter what broke along the way. Her phone buzzed quietly inside her coat pocket. Unknown number. Sadie almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Hello, silence. Then Lloyd's voice. Soft. Careful. Hi. Sadie closed her eyes briefly. Not from pain anymore. Just memory. Hi, Lloyd. For a moment, neither spoke. Waves crashed gently nearby. Finally, he asked, How are you? And strangely, she could answer honestly now. I'm good. Not performative. Not revenge-driven. True. Lloyd exhaled quietly, like the answer both hurt and relieved him. I saw the article about the hotel project. Sadie smiled faintly toward the ocean. It's going well. You always were brilliant. The compliment arrived years too late, but somehow it no longer hurt hearing that. Thank you. Another silence. Then Lloyd said softly, I miss talking to you. Sadie's chest tightened slightly, because some grief never disappeared completely. Certain people remained woven into your history forever, whether they deserved access to your future or not. But history and future were not the same thing. I know, she whispered gently. Lloyd's voice sounded distant now. I keep thinking maybe if I had appreciated you sooner. Sadie looked up toward the moonlight reflecting across dark water. But you didn't. No anger. Just truth. Lloyd swallowed hard on the other end. I hope someone loves you the way I should have. That one almost broke her. Because maybe that was the most honest thing he ever said. Sadie blinked back sudden tears, then smiled softly into the night. I hope you learn how to love yourself without destroying people first. Silence. Painfully human silence. Then finally, Lloyd whispered, Goodbye, Sadie. She closed her eyes, and somewhere deep inside her chest, the last piece of grief finally loosened. Goodbye, Lloyd. The call ended quietly. No dramatic ending. No final fight. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a broken love story, finally accepting it was over. Sadie lowered the phone slowly, then looked out at the endless ocean stretching beneath moonlight. Months ago, she thought losing Lloyd Cunningham would destroy her. Instead, losing herself inside that marriage had been the real tragedy. And surviving it, that became her freedom. For the first time in years, Sadie smiled without pretending. Not for appearances, not for survival, not to hide pain, just because peace finally felt real.